We all love a good, intelligent movie. I mean, who hasn't been charmed by intricately plotted twists or been bowled over by the mind-melting array of thrillers that someone like Christopher Nolan, say, has brought to us over the years? However, making a clever movie for attentive audiences isn't always easy. And if a movie's reach exceeds its grasp, or God forbid it ends up talking down to its audience, viewers are certainly going to be vocal about it. With that in mind, then, I'm Josh from Whatculture.com, and these are 6 movies that thought they were smart, but really weren't. Number 6, Deep Water. Despite being a pretty awful movie all in all, this long-delayed erotic thriller starring Ana de Armas and Ben Affleck as one of cinema's most dysfunctional husband and wife duos so desperately wanted to be a Gone Girl-style intelligent chiller, but it can't even muster up enough enthusiasm to properly hide its own twists. See, the flick essentially follows Affleck as a disgruntled husband annoyed at Armas's Melinda's constant affairs. Though they ostensibly have an open marriage, Affleck's Vic takes to threatening her conquests, informing one that he actually killed the last person that Melinda had an affair with. The big question of the early movie then is whether or not Vic's threats are just pub talk, or whether this family man really is a killer. And it's a fine setup, but Deep Water lacks the kind of prowess needed to spin a tale that keeps you guessing. With some truly inept filmmaking, audiences are always 2 steps ahead of the movie, leaving the twists to land with a thud. Number 5, Law-Abiding Citizen. Law-Abiding Citizen is a ludicrously entertaining revenge thriller about Clyde Shelton, a man who targets the US criminal justice system after his wife and daughter are murdered by 2 men. And yeah, as a side note, anybody called Clyde is 100% prepared and able at all times to kick your head in. Going back to the movie though, his anger stems from prosecutor Nick Rice allowing one of 2 perpetrators, Darby, to cop a plea deal by testifying against his accomplice, saving himself from the death penalty and granting him a severely reduced sentence. A deeply depressed, angry Shelton then gets bloody revenge on Darby early in the film when he is released from prison, horribly dismembering him before turning his attention to Nick and his colleagues. We later find out though that Shelton has previously worked for the CIA, designing complex devices of murder, leading to several convoluted sequences in which he kills a number of Rice's colleagues in hilariously elaborate ways. As if that wasn't enough, it turns out that Shelton actually owns a warehouse with a tunnel that leads directly into the prison, explaining how these murders occurred while he was apparently still in jail. He finally plots to blow up City Hall, but is eventually outsmarted by Rice, who leaves the bomb in Shelton's cell, killing him as the movie ends. Now, what's truly ridiculous about Law-Abiding Citizen is its weirdly serious tone. It clearly wants to be a smart, thought-provoking treatise on the darker side of the American justice system, but then completely ruins this wit with its laughable, but admittedly damn fun, B-movie narrative, which just gets more absurd as it goes on, completely undermining that serious intent even as it massively entertains. Is there a clever movie in here waiting to get out? Absolutely, but it's best thought of as a daft revenge flick rather than anything more profound or important. Number 4, High Tension. High Tension is a textbook example of a great movie that completely derails itself in the final moments. Most of the flick revolves around 2 friends, Marie and Alex, who find themselves being stalked by a sadistic killer after he summarily murders Alex's entire family in extremely brutal fashion. And after Alex is kidnapped by the killer, Marie must save her, though once the police arrive at a gas station where more murder has taken place, they discover the truth. By viewing a surveillance tape, we see that Marie has in fact been the killer all along. But wait, what? Yeah, Marie is crazy and apparently in love with Alex, and though the climax of the movie is still fun to watch thanks to some fancy gore, it has, for all intents and purposes, been ruined by this stupid and kinda pointless revelation. What's more, the shocking nature of the reveal makes it clear that director Alexandre Aja thought this twist was clever when in fact it just invalidates large portions of what we'd seen on screen and forces the film to become completely nonsensical. There is no reasonable explanation given for the plot twist, and a mostly great, straightforward slasher movie is forever tarnished. Number 3, Transcendence. Though virtually nobody remembers Transcendence now, it was a hugely anticipated movie in the year of its release, and ultimately a huge disappointment that slapped the brakes on Wally Pfister's directorial career. The premise revolves around Will Castor, a scientist whose consciousness is uploaded to a computer shortly before he dies, though his colleagues soon find themselves questioning whether what they're dealing with really is Will or an exponentially more dangerous digital mutation. And that's a great idea, right? Well, sadly, the great idea was propped up by a totally inane script. Even ignoring how easily the team is able to capture and upload the content of Will's brain, I mean, what kind of internet connection are these guys rocking? It's hilarious how simply putting this information online allows him to reign free uninhabited, building a techno-utopia complete with scientific breakthroughs far in advance of our own. The characters are a major problem here in selling the movie to audiences as well. Pretty much anyone on either side of the fight who isn't Paul Bettany's character ends up looking rather stupid, and the movie's apparent message that technology can be bad in the wrong hands, but progress is fascinating, feels completely muddled by the end. It's not nearly as innovative or clever as it thinks it is, and it's little surprise that critics and audiences largely rejected it. Number 2, Trance. In the shadow of Christopher Nolan's Inception, a number of movies tried their own hand at crafting intelligent, intricately crafted existential thrillers, which visualize concepts of the mind in unexpected, inventive ways. One of the more notable efforts is Danny Boyle's Trance, which follows an art auctioneer, Simon, who gets involved with a heist in his own auction house. And when he can't seem to remember the location of the stolen painting, his gangster cohort Frank hires a hypnotherapist named Elizabeth to try and retrieve the repressed information from Simon's own mind. As you might have guessed from that description, it is a tricky premise, but one that's promisingly introduced by Boyle, even to viewers who might be skeptical by the practice of hypnotism. The main pull of the movie is not knowing who truly is in control, until later on we discover that Elizabeth is playing both sides against each other, using her intelligence and sexuality to ensnare the pair. Now, this would have been sufficient enough, but the script then begins to strain credibility and interest as it layers upon plot twist after plot twist under the pretense of being clever, when really it's just trying to be too clever for its own good. The revelation that Simon was Elizabeth's abusive ex prior to the events of the movie is certainly somewhat compelling, though by the time the ridiculous finale rolls round in which Elizabeth slams a truck into both Simon and Frank, the latter of whom is tied up inside a car, and sends them plummeting into a river, Trance has very much flung itself gleefully off its own rails and become too silly to truly consider smart. Number 1, Funny Games. Michael Haneke's Funny Games, in both its original form and the US Naomi Watts starring remake, is a film aimed almost solely to provoke, raising questions about the nature of violence and how we as consumers of culture engage with it. The narrative, which sees two sadistic young men take a family hostage and then torture them, is intentionally framed as a relatively generic thriller, toying with the audience's expectations of how a story such as this should unfold. Of course, the director has other ideas, and aside from never revealing the motives of the two men, something audiences reared on Hollywood typically crave, he shows very little violence on screen in an attempt to provoke audiences who may have been expecting, even hoping, to savor a gore fest. The two boys also constantly break the fourth wall in an attempt to shatter our connection with the grim material, the most famous moment of course being when the mother of the family, Anna, shoots one of the boys, at which point the other lad, Paul, uses a remote control to simply rewind the film and stop her doing it. The director has stated that he wanted to make a movie that critiques the violence proliferated in mass media, and the whole point of the flick was to be violent and have little intrinsic human worth. Consequently, there is no redemption for the family, the villains are not punished, nor are we given any reason for why they commit these acts. Now, this is an admirable goal and not at all a bad premise for a movie, but it intentionally makes Funny Games a frequently frustrating film to watch, and one that, more tragically, bashes viewers over the head with its ideology and doesn't do so in a particularly intelligent or really thought-provoking way. It's pretty cut and dry. Paul's final smirk into the camera then feels less like the director trying to plead with us and more like he's talking down to us and judging the audience for something that he's put on screen. As a result, the obnoxiousness of how the message is delivered may ultimately override the meaning itself.